perspective. Question of the day: can you be a Christian and be a Democrat? I want to talk about that because I've been hearing that lately. I've been hearing, and of course by Christians, I've been hearing this. Can you be a Christian and be a Democrat? Well, let's look at some of the arguments, or I guess reasons why those who ask the question, usually from a conservative side, conservative Christians, conservative Christians. So the ones who's asking the questions are not conservatives per se, are not just Republicans, but conservative Christians. And that's important because the reasons why they are asking this question, the reasons why they say or they ask the questions, can you be a Christian? Now, first and foremost, what they mean is that can you be a evangelical Christian? So we kind of have to understand that. Can you be an evangelical Christian? And be a Democrat? Well, so why do they ask the question? Why do they ask, can you be a Christian? A Democrat and a Christian. Understand that. Can you be an let me turn this down. Why can't? So they ask the question, why or how can you be a Christian? So first of all, understand evangelical Christians who are the conservative, who have attached themselves to conservatives. When we say evangelical, we are saying specifically not just Christian, okay, but is a brand of Christian that believes or adhere to a stricter interpretation and practice of Christianity. In other words, that's their claim. But it also gives rise to more scrutiny of them, and I'll come back around to that. So the term evangelical Christianity is a theological term, and probably more recently, I'm going to say about the 60s, the term evangelical. I'm not sure on that, my date here, but the term evangelical, it's a more recent term. So what you have with evangelicals is they are, of course, conservative and then Christian. So they believe in God, country, church, and of course the conservative values. Now, the conservatism and Christianity are not exclusive. They share values, and you can even probably argue that the conservative values were formed by the Christian Judeo ethic. But that in and of itself is not, and this is what you have to understand, which we're not going to get into here, but this reaches back a few centuries when we go into what was going on over in Europe, okay? And technically we can even go back further than that, but just let's say the modern kind of evolution of what has become the Christian right, evangelicalism, conservatism. So if you go back just to England, Europe, and you see this going back and forth between Catholicism and Protestantism, and the idea is that, remember, Christianity gained control and was the dominant thought of the world for over 1,000 years. Beginning, if you want to say really the rise, well, you can probably go back to the 3rd century with Emperor Constantine, who became a Christian. And then he declared the Roman Empire a Christian state. That he eventually what evolved into the Roman Catholic Church, and then that ruled for 1,000 years. There was always this kind of going back and forth between who had the greater authority, the Pope or the Pope or the king. So when you get to the 15th century, Catholicism, when the Protestants broke from the Catholicism, there was that struggle between, whoever was king at the time, depending upon what his religion was. For example, if the king or queen was a Catholic, you were a Catholic, right? So you get rid of that king, and all of a sudden the next king who came to power, if they were Protestant, then you were Protestant. And it was going back and forth. In both cases, there was corruption, high corruption. And what you had was they ruled both church and state. Again, that started with Constantine, this kind of marriage of church and state. So when we came to the Americas, one of the things that was what was so precious about the separation of church and state was that's what they were getting away from. This back and forth, telling the people how to think, telling the people what to believe, how to worship, press. How the press was controlled by the state. So America was this experiment that, of course, was to change all of that. So, but they kind of fell into the same habits, by the way. They fell into controlling people and all that. If you wasn't, again, evangelical or a Christian, right, or a Christian, you could be persecuted by Christians, okay? So when we come to the modern times, then you see the platform that kind of really developed in the 60s. Now, the reason why the kind of 60s is important, when we look at the evolution of the country, the 40s, 30s, 40s, even 20s, evangelicalism wasn't the prevailing thought. When you come to the 50s, you kind of see the change in culture of the country. If I want to be funny here, Elvis shook loose the foundation. I'm being funny, but it was rock and roll. It was a whole bunch of other things that took that began to shape, right, the culture, and it wasn't Christianity. But they were still a large voting bloc. In other words, most people considered themselves Christians, and most of the conservatives were white. So when we come to the 60s, the Christian right formed, and by the way, they formed in support of Bob Jones. That was part of the platform. So there was a big racist part of this. They formed, and then the people like the Moore majority that came in the 70s, but the Christian right actually preceded them. So they began to discuss, we need to have a political platform, and they had certain talking points. So gay and anti-gay stance, anti-abortion stance. And there were some other ones that since they had to kind of let go, like prayer in school and things like that. But the two talking points, of course, that have survived, that almost is when you talk about family values, are an anti-abortion and anti-gay stance. More anti-abortion now, less. You don't hear too much of an anti-gay stance today. Why? Not a lot of traction with that. A lot of conservatives support gay rights, by the way. All right, so you can track this with the 60s with the rise of the civil rights movement. And so the evangelical conservative movement, again, was racist. They didn't embrace the church. Remember, I couldn't go to most churches, white churches. I couldn't be a part of most denominations. they didn't allow blacks. Yes, and that's unbelievable. Okay, the passage of the Civil Rights Bill, then you have there also rise two things that happen. You had a defection of white Dixiecrats, because they were angry at the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. So a lot of them shifted over to the Republican Party. And by the way, I am talking Christians as well. I'm talking about Christians too. They shifted over to the Republican Party. And from there, many of the Democrat so you had a shift of philosophy. So that, and a kind of a flip-flop where the Republican parties who they weren't the greatest champions, but there were a lot of things that they did that, of course, furthered the black community, such as ending slavery. Okay, and then also a passage of the Civil Rights Bill. But that shifted. The Democrats began to take upon a lot of the social justice issues. Now, also what came along is a lot of the liberal policies of the Democrats. And this is where you come with this cultural war between conservatives and Christians. Conservatives and Democrats, or liberal. And since a lot of the liberal policies of just liberal, and then Christians will fall more on the conservative side, so now the kind of switches happen, and you're kind of getting somewhat back to it because a lot of conservatives support gay rights. A lot of Republicans support even abortion in case of rape and incest. But the social justice issues, abortion, gay rights, social justice, human rights, fall on Democrats. Now, the thing about Democrats is that, or liberals, or a liberal agenda, a lot of the liberal agenda that you may see today fall in the terms of and fall in favor of humanism. And what you have is that a lot of them will say, okay, we are not humanist. Because we're humanist, science will fall in that, evolution, okay? And thus, if I want to be philosophical, one of the reasons why science and all these things fall into into this platform is that it's a way of not having God. So the question then that conservatives and conservative Christians will ask is, can you be a Christian and support the godless liberal platforms such as abortion? Which is kind of amazing to me, because they make it only about one issue, right? Well, you can say family values, but abortion becomes one of the chief issues. Now, abortion is the strongest issue. So if you say I'm a Democrat, then they accuse that you're not a Christian. Well, my answer to that will come is that, can you be in either party and be a Christian? Because conservatives today certainly have a lot of races in them. There's a lot of other issues on both sides. But here is my answer to the question. Yes, you can be a Christian and be involved in either party, because being a Christian is not based upon party affiliation, but do you believe on Jesus Christ? That's what being a Christian about. And those who are asking the question that can you be a Christian and be a Democrat, they come to another area called hypocrisy, religion, tradition of men. And they're not looking at their own sin. And so my answer to the question, can you be a Democrat and be a Christian? Absolutely. Just like you can be a Christian and be a conservative. See, I see politics as opposite sides of the same evil coin. And I think Christians should be very careful about how they attach themselves to either party, either ideology, because what we're seeing today is the great compromise of both sides. Alright guys, that is my perspective. Please like and share this video. And if you have a thought or comment, add it in the comment section. All comments are welcome. And don't forget to subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. All comments, don't forget to subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. Till next time, I'll see you then.